Hello everyone, welcome to Indian Economy by Aman Soni. In today's news hour, we'll be discussing the important articles related to economy from the Hindu newspaper. In page 1, we do not have any news related to economy. Let's skip to the editorial page. Let's look at this article. Here we don't need to go into the details about the Kerala state, but we'll look into some of the economic concepts here from this article. So what is Kerala model of development? So we have come to understand that having high level of human development indicators like performing well in health, education, quality of life, etc., even at a relatively low income level. Kerala is one of the top 10 states in terms of state GDP also, but when it comes to the economic indicators, developmental indicators, it almost comes in the top every time. So this is the Kerala model of development. But the article also states that there is a raising criticism for this Kerala model of development now that they are exporting their unemployment and overly getting dependent on the remittances from the Arab countries. And also the social and environmental risks are rising, which aggravated the level of floods that Kerala has experienced. And the article says that now even the state GDP has contracted, the unemployment is increasing, which is much higher than the national average. So there are some solutions which we can use in all the answers for general economy related questions, and let's look into those solutions. So these things would be mitigated by following these solutions. And what are those solutions? Socio-economic investments, attention to good governance, at the same time having focus on environment, that is sustainable development, developing into a knowledge economy where we invest into research and development, quality higher education, vocational training to upskill the labor. And because Kerala is a tourism state, they have given the focusing on tourism and hospitality. And we need both quantitative and qualitative intervention in health and education, because if health and education are good, it will have positive impacts on other aspects of the economy as well. And regarding sustainable development, there are few points here, and those are investments to be made to repair the forest, river systems, water bodies, and states having a program of forest restoration, reviving the network of rivers, periodic release of water from the dams. In the recent economic survey, it discussed that how the level of water in the dams is also related to the economic activity, and the water levels in dams was considered as one of the economic indicators. That's about that article. It's time to take a relook at privatization. This article talks about the negatives of privatization and why privatization is not always good. So let's go into the details. It begins by saying there is a thinking among the policymakers that privatization is a solution for all the things in the economy, but it is not always true. And why so? Because various studies have shown that a public sector undertaking which is given freedom to carry on its operation, it almost performs the same level as a private enterprise. So only when the public sector is not giving the freedom to act on its business, only when it will be lagging and it will be inefficient. But if you give them the freedom and allow them to work like a private sector unit, even they'll be performing like a private sector unit. And some of the privatized companies like VSNL and Hindustan Zinc performed better because the author says they might be not just because of the privatization, but the factors that happen during the privatization. That is, when the company is privatized, they'll get a better funding from the private promoter, whereas earlier the government would not have been investing that much funds, and maybe also better business cycles. The growth cycles would help the privatized firm. And the author goes into details, takes on points, and discusses why privatization is not the panacea always. So privatization as a revenue source. The government looks at the disinvestment targets as the revenue source, but the author says that we should not spend them for paying off our loans on the revenue expenditure. In fact, whatever returns we get from the privatization from the disinvestment, we should invest that in the capital expenditure and not use it for revenue expenditure. And even during the disinvestment process, the actual targets that we have for disinvestment and the actual amount that we get from disinvestment is always less. We would have a high target for disinvestment, the amount that we have to realize from selling the public sector unit, but in reality, we'll get a lot lesser. And it is not always easy to privatize, because even if when the government is ready to sell, nobody comes to purchase them. Take example of Air India. The government wanted to sell Air India from 3 years. Finally, after 3 years, the Tatas have taken Air India only after the government went for complete take sale of Air India. And when the government wanted to sell the oil and gas blocks, it just had 3 firms participating, and 2 among them were public sector undertakings. So if the company that is being disinvested is not being performing well, the private sector won't be interested because it might generate losses to them. So privatization is not always easy. And there is the challenge of valuation. The author says that the government should not go for valuation at once and sell it completely. Instead, they should sell it a bit by bit. For example, if you take the example of Maruti Suzuki, where the government had stake in Maruti, instead of directly selling the entire stake of government at once, the government slowly sold little by little. That way, it got more income because you can value the firm better, and if the valuation is higher, the amount you get from the sale would be also higher. And the author also talks about the social consequences of privatization, because public sector undertakings provide employment and they have multiplier effects, but when the firm is privatized, they can hire and fire the employees. It can lead to mass layoffs, so it is not always good for the employment also. And there is also a problem of greater concentration of public assets in the hands of just few individuals. For example, in the financial year 2020, around 70% of the profits generated in the corporate sector came from just 20 firms. On one hand, we have rising incomes of the rich and increasing number of the poor. On the other hand, even in the corporate sector, there is oligopoly. Oligopoly is when few firms dominate the market. Monopoly is when one firm dominates the market. For example, in the telecom sector, now around 3 major players are left. Now telecom sector is an example for oligopoly. And the author says same happens in the other sectors like the cigarette business, the paint business, the telecom business, the airport operation. These are all being oligopolized. That is, just few firms control the entire market. And what will happen if just few firms control the market? Even if they increase the prices, the customers have no choice but to purchase them. And the author says that is currently happening in the telecom sector. Earlier, everyone reduced the prices in order to get the customers share, but now that only few firms are left, the customer doesn't have any other choice. So even if the firms increase the price, the customer has to buy only from them, and this will lead to inflation and also loss of strategic control for the government if the government gives away such firms to the private sector. So the author suggests that instead of focusing highly on privatization and trying to fall back on the private sector to improve the economy, what you have to do is reform the public sector. The author gives some international examples wherein China is led by the corporatized public sector undertakings. That is, all the PSUs in China got under a undertaking called SASAC. So that firm manages all the public sector undertakings, and that will lead to efficiency. How this one undertaking can manage better governance, it will appoint the leadership, it will execute mergers and acquisitions. And same happened with the Singapore. Even in Singapore, the finance ministry makes the policy, but there is a holding firm for all the government companies who carries on the day-to-day working of the other PSUs under it. So the author suggests that India also should constitute a holding firm like that, and all the public sector units should be under that, so that there will be better management and efficiency in the public sector working. And the author ends by saying that we should not use the disinvestment proceedings that we get from privatization on giving subsidies and writing off loans, that is on the revenue expenditure, but instead we should invest them on capital expenditure. And in the news page, we do not have any news related to economy. In the business page, GST reset report to be in April. The GST Council decides the rates of GST, and now the GST Council is going to meet in April, and they are going to suggest some rate changes, that is review of rates on few of the items. On some of the items it would be increased, on some of the items it would be decreased. That is the duty of the GST Council, and you don't need to go into the details of this article, you just need to know the concept. The Customs Act change is aimed at securing sensitive trade data. The government in recent budget said that anyone who is publishing the data related to imports, exports, etc. would be punished. Why they did it? Because the data of the imports, exports, the personal details of the suppliers, everything was available on darknet for sale. So this is a privacy and security issue, and the government is now clarifying that there is nothing wrong in publishing the aggregate data for a statistical purpose, just that publishing the sensitive information for sale on the darknet is going to be criminalized. We can skip this news. Profits about Airtel, Amazon. We have already discussed the Amazon issue. And all this news related to the individual company affairs can be skipped. And here you just need to know the headlines. India and Asian countries are in a talks to start a free trade agreement. Those are all the articles related to economy today. Thank you so much.